Thank you, John. Yeah, I started working here on the waterfront about over 60 years ago, and I was working on tugboats while going to the Maritime Academy, working for Tom Crowley, and I met his nephew there, Tom Asher, who's a member of your society, and he volunteered me to do this. I didn't come on my own. But anyway, so I put together a PowerPoint slideshow, and we'll just go through them. There's about 70, so I'm going to have to go pretty fast in some places. So this first picture is the Amador. I think that's about 1875, something like that. And the one on the bottom is the newest ferry to come into San Francisco Bay. We went from car ferries and train ferries to passenger-only ferries in the 80s, after about a 40-year lack of ferry boats. That's just about me. You don't need to know that. So let me read through this. I'm not going to read through the slides except for two of them, I think. And that's the listing. And I had to add something to this one this morning. As I've been working on this since John got me started 6 months ago or something, and seems like every couple of days something else comes up. And boy, did one of them come up today. So in 1826, John Reed, or Foley, begins ferry service from Oakland to San Francisco with a sailboat once or twice a week. Now that's I guess if the wind's blowing, he'll go. In 1848, the population of San Francisco was 900 people. In 1848, 900. Now, I don't know if that includes indigenous people or not. I'm embarrassed to say, but I didn't look it up past that because gold was discovered in late 1848, and then the 49ers all came. So in 1850, the Kangaroo started service, which you'll see the picture of the Kangaroo, from Benicia to Port Costa. In 1851, Thomas Gray started the creek route from Oakland to San Francisco. In 1853, the Clinton, a 194-ton sidewheeler, starts San Francisco Bay crossings. That's a pretty big ferry. But here's the one that really jumped out at me this morning. In 1879, a railroad ferry service starts carrying 36 freight or 24 passenger cars with their locomotives. Restaurant and bar service are provided. I wrote that, and then this morning I looked up the Solano, one of the two vessels. The thing was 425 feet long, 116 feet wide, and had 4,000 horsepower. And it only ran from Benicia to Port Costa. Pretty fast. But in 1904, she made roughly 40 crossings every day, 365 days a year. They in 1904 alone carried 115,000 cars and 56,000 passengers in 1904. That one blew me away because one of my first jobs at Crowley was inspecting some barges that were being built at Bethlehem Shipyard down where Pier 20 is now, or Pier 80. And we were building barges that carried rail cars, and they were two barges. It would take two barges to equal that one ferry built in 1879. And we were pulling those with less horsepower than that ferry had. It's just amazing. As I keep getting into it, I'm more amazed at how people did so many things back then with not very many power tools. No Home Depot. In 1922, Golden Gate Ferry Company begins Hyde Street Sausalito service. This thing's out of line here, not 1903, well, maybe it was, 1903, 1909, somewhere in there. The Key System, which was a railroad streetcar line, decided they wanted to get in the ferry service, and they started San Francisco, Oakland, near where the current toll booths are. In 1906, the first auto ferry, Melrose, carried 100 cars and 400 passengers. There weren't That's probably most of the cars that were here. And in 1912, the Sacramento and San Joaquin service started. In 1932, Santa Rosa and Petaluma service. 1930s, they were carrying 150,000 passengers a day on ferry boats. In 1935, there were 50 ferry boats running every day. So then the next slide is the Kangaroo, and that's kind of looks like something out of the swamp, but that was early on. Then, okay, we got to read this page, sorry. This is from 1850 to 1939, there were 27 ferry routes, 125 boats to 29 destinations. I had no idea when I started this. That's a lot of boats. In 1926, as we said, the key system started. 1935, I just said that, 50 million passengers and 6 million cars and trucks aboard about 50 boats. It turns out that's more passengers than went through San Francisco Airport in 2022. And the Bay Area population in 1935 was only 900,000, so they must all have been riding the ferries. 1936 to 39, San Francisco Bay Area bridge construction. During World War II, they brought the ferries back to carry workers and supplies for the shipyards. In 19-something, I couldn't find this one, but I know it's there. There's a bridge non-compete law by California State so they could sell bridge bonds to get the bridges built. 1958, the San Leandro, which was a big ferry, ceased operation, and she's the last. Draw a line there. Those were car ferries, passenger train ferries. So in 1970 to 78, Golden Gate Bridge, the Big Red Bridge, ferries, that's the name of the Golden Gate Bridge ferries, opened 2 new terminals, Larkspur and San Francisco downtown, and they run 3 new fast boats. And the boats were fast. They were about 30 miles an hour. But they had problems with the amount of fuel they burned to get that much power. And also they had a big wake problem coming out of Larkspur, so they had to slow them down. They repowered them in 8 years later, and put diesels in them. And they're still running to this day. There's 3 of them called the Spalding class. In 1984, the Red and White Fleet, which was Crowley Maritime, and now Tom Escher, they started Vallejo, San Francisco service, and it says 1 hour, ? And 30 miles an hour-ish. And the first boat was the Catamaran, it was called. It was a high-speed catamaran designed in Australia, built in Washington, and I was the project manager. And so 1 hour, well, it could do it in 1 hour, but after about 500 trips, it blew an engine. And then 250 more trips, it blew another engine. And that went on for years. I mean, we had to slow it down. It carried 400 passengers. We had to take it down to 225. And that boat is still in service in New York Harbor. Hornblower bought it and took it there. And I mentioned that about the ish is important, as you'll see later on, because it has to do with the power density of how much power you can get out of a diesel engine and keep it running. And they oversold that one. They weren't the only ones. Most companies in the early high-speed ferry boat days, and even today, are still having problems with that power-to-weight ratio. You've got a big, heavy engine, and the boat needs to be light to go fast. It's like an airplane that won't fly. So, but they're getting better and better and better, so the service now is quite reliable. Like the city of Vallejo started in 1997 with the Antinely, a 35-mile-an-hour boat, and that one used a different German engine. And it was very successful, and just went out of service a couple of years ago because of clean air rules, which we'll get into later. In 1992, Harbor Bay Maritime started the Oakland Alameda, well, at that time, Alameda service from Harbor Bay to San Francisco to the ferry building. Blue and Gold started the Oakland Alameda ferry service from Oakland to the ferry building. Oakland Alameda, it's a little triangle, and that's still running. 1999, San Francisco Bay Water Transit Authority was formed by the California state and funded. And the objective there was to promote water ferry transit. And so over the next few years, WTA became WEDA, which is Water Emergency Transit. And WEDA bought the Alameda ferry service, and they bought the Vallejo service. And after that, in the 2000s, 2007, they changed the name. 2008 or so, they started building a series of 4 boats called the Gemini class that were the cleanest boats in the world and the lowest wake. So they've been pushing that hard since then, they being Water Emergency Transit Authority. WEDA. Somebody say it's WEDA. WEDA is better. That's where that came from. So to summarize that, in 1850 to 1935, 140 new ferries, 27 companies enter and end service. Still afloat, if you want to see them, is the Eureka is at Hyde Street Pier right now, but it's going to Vallejo because they're going to redo the entire Hyde Street Pier and take everything down and build it back up. The Klamath is at Pier 9, and it's a Bay Area Council office. That's a beautiful reconstructed, beautiful boat. The Santa Rosa is at Pier 1. It's the Hornblower office. That's another good one to look at. The Berkeley is in San Diego, restored. So I don't think I have to read too much anymore. So here's your 140 local boats, and I found these pictures in this great book, San Francisco Bay Ferryboats. It's amazing what you can find online. And you can see the pictures of them. They're similar, and they're all got black smoke belching out of the top. They were steam engines up until, well, I guess right till the end, 1958. And I'm wondering if any of them burned coal. And if you go clear back to 1850 when they started, they had plenty of coal. Well, they were getting coal from Newcastle in Australia, but I don't know that they had fuel oil. So that's a question we'll work on. Here's a picture of the 27 routes all over the bay. San Francisco Ferry Building, there are 8 ferry slips right there, and notice that they're shaped like the bow of a ship, and the ferries are kind of like a, what do you call that thing? They're pointed on both ends. And so they could go into the slip, and there's about a 2 or 3 knot current that goes by there twice a day, actually 4 times a day. And like the Eureka, if you go down and look at the Eureka, you can see the big side wheels and the big walking beam up on the top. Well, the side wheels, it had one engine, has one engine. And so they couldn't have one side turning and the other going the other direction, which would make it easy to turn. They both went the same way. So they were pretty hard to steer. They had a rudder on each end. So that's why the docks were built in such a way they could just slip in there, and they're called slips. Okay, this is the Solano and the Martinez in Benicia service. I mentioned that earlier. If you look at the bow of that thing, you can see a train car on the bow and the 4 exhaust pipes. It had 2,000 horsepower engines, steam engines. The pistons were 5 feet in diameter, and they would go up and down 11 feet, about what these things are here in the room. This is a big engine, and they ran for 45 years or something. It's amazing. Now, the next one is my favorite. John sent me this one. There's 3,000 people on there. And so you sent it, and I looked, and I put it in there. Yeah, the 3,000 people. Well, today I looked it up again, and what you don't see the black the black right in here, those are rail cars. It's got 24 rail cars on it with 3,000 people. So the Coast Guard wasn't around then to make sure they didn't carry too many people. And yeah, that's a lot of life jackets. That's a really good question. Did they ever have life jackets back then? Well, we're coming to that. Okay, the Park Service down at Hyde Street has this vessel still. It's been restored. She's a real beauty. And they used to operate as a ferry. It was a hay schooner. You can still go out on her if you want to pay the price, which, a charter. Okay, now this is kind of fun. Collision happens in the fog. San Rafael rammed by the Sausalito. Jack London gets an idea. The bestseller book, The Sea Wolf, is written. And I just printed out, you can Google it and download the PDF file of the book. Just get the first chapter, and it's 8 pages. And that drew me in. I've read it twice, and I'll probably read it again. Just those first 8 pages talk about what happened here. I'm not going to read all that, don't worry. But basically, on November 30th, 1901, an unusually foggy night, even by San Francisco standards, the Sausalito collided with the San Rafael. Worst ferry boat collision in history. Some people died, not many. Well, Carl Nolte wrote this, so it's really good. He's another one to read. 3 people died as a result of the collision, and an old horse named Dick, who was used to move baggage carts around the ferry, refused to leave and went down with the ship. Which is kind of sad. They were able to get the 2 ships together, and the people got off one onto the other. But Dick wasn't moving over there. I don't blame him. 4 legs. 2 captains managed to last their vessels together, but the career of the captain of the Sausalito was ruined. But imagine going across the bay. I mean, probably some of you have driven across the bay in heavy fog, and I've been out there for 2.5 years on tugboats in the heavy fog some of those days, and you couldn't see that wall from the wheelhouse. And these guys are running these ferry boats back and forth, and every once in a while they hit. So get that first 8 pages of Jack London's. It's amazing, the words that he used and the way he describes that. And then he went on to make a real story out of it. I mean, a fiction story out of it. In 1922, auto ferry service was initiated at the Hyde Street Pier to Sausalito. Completion of the bridge, the service declined but hung on until 1941, when the pier in Sausalito was removed for the creation of Marin Ship, a shipbuilding operation to aid the World War II war effort. And this is a picture of the ferries lined up to get on there. And we'll come back to that in a second. This is the Eureka. Another amazing thing, she was built as the Ukiah and rebuilt as the Eureka for the railroad in Tiburon. Now imagine that today. Well, you can. Oh, there's the engine. That size of that big thing up on the top there, and the paddle wheel, and there's another paddle wheel on the other side. When they said rebuilt, they mean it. That would be cost prohibitive to do today, that's for sure. So if you want to see how that worked, you can go to Tiburon in this building, and this is a layout of the town of Tiburon back then. And there's a railroad museum, a little toy train museum in Tiburon that's open 3 or 4 days a week. You really get the feel for how much rail was going on then. Okay, Hyde Street Pier, as I mentioned, is closed November 4th. Although you can still go out there and see some of the things. We mentioned the Klamath. That vessel is now at Pier 3, right down the street here, and it's an office building. So I got this picture because my wife and I went down there a couple weeks ago. Beautiful day, went out to the Balclutha, and there's near the little boathouse, the propellers from the Klamath are there, and I put from paddle wheels to propellers. So if you look at most of the ferry boats, of the 140 ferry boats, I'd say 2/3 of them had propellers, which then were a new thing. Golden Gate International Exposition in 1939-40 with the key system boats and the terminal. This picture I thought was superb. How much money they must have put in to have whitewashed piles and the same shape, but it's a thing of beauty. And that was the end. That was the key system. That was the end of the key system, but they put that dock in for the exhibition. And that's not a misprint. I have no idea what mole means in terms of ferry boats. Then I mentioned Crowley, where I started. The company started in 1883 here in San Francisco on Meigs Wharf, which is now Fisherman's Wharf area. And they started ferry service. Well, Tom Crowley Sr. started ferry service in, not exactly on purpose, but after the 1906 earthquake, he took his barges and his tugs and his launches and took people from the city to Oakland, as many people that could go for free for days. So he's been in the ferry service ever since. And at the end of this, I'll show you where they are now. I also found there's Cross Bay Air Service in 1914. How would you like to take an airplane and cross to Oakland in 1914? From Crissy Field, actually. That's kind of scary aeronautical. 1930 to 33, Air Ferries Limited went from Pier 5 in San Francisco to Franklin Street in Oakland. 1960, San Francisco Helicopter, from San Francisco and Oakland airports to various cities. 1983 to 86, SFO helicopters, and then they went out of business. I think part of that was noise, too much noise. I remember taking a helicopter New York City to the airport from top of the World Trade Center, and it was great, but it was noisy. So another one I have to read. Post-World War II, diesel-powered passenger-only boats enter service. And passenger-only is, well, diesel's part of it. Passenger-only is the other part. In post-World War II, railroads went from steam engines, steam locomotives to diesels in the early 50s, well, mid-50s. And so passenger-only boats, in 1959, Tiburon Angel Island service started. In 62, Red and White Fleet started running to Tiburon to San Francisco. 1970, Golden Gate started going to San Francisco, Sausalito, Larkspur. 83, Red and White Fleet, San Francisco, Vallejo, the high-speed service with 400 passengers. 1992, Blue and Gold Fleet, let me back up, 1983, Red and White started that. It'll say it later, but the city of Vallejo stepped up and bought a boat, had a boat built specifically for that, and have been very successful on that service to this day. And the number of people they take is amazing. And also their reliability, they're at 99.4% uptime. The way they did it is they had a spare boat at a cost of $20 million. But if you're in that business, that's what you have to do. 1992, Blue and Gold, Oakland Alameda. 93, Harbor Bay Maritime. 97, Blue and Gold Fleet takes over Red and White ferries. Red and White sold the boats to Blue and Gold Fleet, who operate Pier 39. Those boats are still operating. Blue and Gold Fleet is the prime operator for WIDA, and they're running I believe, 17 boats now. Blue and Gold is actually running the boats and managing them and doing a really good job. Their safety record is just amazing. Rio Vista Caltrans car ferry is still running. Angel Island Service, it's a fifth-generation family operation. Maggie McDonough, who runs it, she's got 3 vessels. They started the current type service in 1959. In 2024, this year, they got an electrification grant for a new and upgraded boat and upgrading the terminals to be electric for clean air. Oh, I got to read another one, except I can barely see it. This is Golden Gate Ferry Service. 1974, slow boat Golden Gate. 78, new Spalding class 650, lawsuits about wake wash, 30 minutes became 45 minutes. 1984-85, the gas turbine engines, airplane engines, were replaced with diesels. The speed further reduced to 19 knots, which makes it a 45-minute crossing. And they're still doing that. 1998, they had a boat built 32 knots, which makes for a 30-minute crossing, and they're still doing that. 2001, new build high-speed Mendocino arrives. 2001 diesel engines. The Detroit diesel engines were replaced with MTU engines, which is a German engine, and they are more fuel efficient, but they're much more durable than the Detroit engines were. Those Detroit engine series have been out of service since 1993. 2009, they bought 2 high-speed ferries, Del Norte and renamed Napa and Golden Gate. They're in service. 2013, refurbished the 3 Spaldings. 2017, taking over the San Francisco Tiburon service, which most of the people in the ferry business can't figure out why they want to do that, because it was always been a money loser. But that's why the bridge toll's going up. 2020, I'll take that back. 2024, they're well along in the design process for building new clean air ferries that are Tier 4, 500 passengers. And this is Tier 4 plus. We'll talk about that. And this is the 3 Spalding class in 1978, 79. Again, they're still running. They've been repowered with cleaner diesels, but they're still doing their job every day. And then they added the high-speed boat. Well, the 2 of them in the middle are the high-speed boats. And this is what's next. 8 new ferries. Each ferry will have 6 engines. Why 6? The Vallejo boats only have 2. Anybody want to take a shot at that? Probably not. It has to do with the exhaust after treatment, the catalytic converter, if you will. This is the only way they could get it done. So speaking of catalytic converter, why would you do that? Look at that exhaust pipe. That's on the maiden voyage of the catamaran in 1983. Again, that boat's still running in New York Harbor, but it got cleaner engines. Not clean enough, but cleaner. 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake generated a lot of ferry service because the first responders, especially medical people, couldn't get to the city or to where they needed to go. And so there was some money put out by the state government and the cities to make it so more ferries get there faster. So that generated quite a few boats. In 1990, in response to that, new boats and terminals are built. Bay Breeze for Alameda, which is still running. I was there when she was born, and then reborn 5 years ago. We repowered it. Mendocino for Golden Gate. Vallejo, I just mentioned that before. So they started with the Jet Cat Express, which they bought from a company in Long Beach. And then in 1997, they added 2 fast boats, big fast boats, really good boats. 2004, they added another boat with a catalytic converter, a clean burning. The catalytic converter part of it didn't work out, but the boat did. 2019, they added clean fast Pyxis class. There are 3 of those boats, and they're beautiful. Harbor Bay Express, 1993, this was the first boat they had to go from Harbor Bay, which is on the south seacoast side of Alameda, to San Francisco. And then they get a second boat, Harbor Bay Express 2. And this was a very fast boat, but not reliable. First engine lasted 37 hours and blew up. And so I helped them, and they would change the engines. We didn't change the engines. We used the same engines, but we added 7 feet to the boat and made propellers instead of the type they had on there. And it ran for years here, and we just sold it, I don't know, 6 years ago or so. It was still not very reliable, and it wasn't very comfortable. So speaking of comfortable, you can read this later if you want. You don't want to go through the whole thing, do we? No, okay. Anyway, WIDA was formed, and they've been building getting funding and building their own fleet, which Blue and Gold is operating, but these boats, there's 17 boats now in that fleet, and they're among the cleanest boats in the world. And the last one there, the Dorado class, that's the picture of that one, the Dorado class, they are Tier 4 plus DP. What does that mean? We'll cut to that. Here's the WIDA map of where they go, and they're expanding all the time. Here's some of their boats, Bay Breeze leading the pack. And then these are 2 Hydrus class. So in 2000, WIDA, at that time Water Transit Authority, issued some new challenges to the builders and operators. They insisted on 85% cleaner exhaust than current technology. And they wanted low wake, so there weren't big waves damaging the shoreline, and they wanted very attractive interiors so that people would want to take the boat. How's that? She's still running. 2001, 23 years, that's pretty good. Ultra safe, this is the operator controls, ultra safe, 2 radars, is all, everything that's on one of these big cruise ships is in that wheelhouse. Except for the satellite the satellite telephone. But it's ultra safe, ergonomically set up, so that we started with this one and we ended up doing, well, all the WIDA boats now have almost exactly that same layout, so that the operators can go from one boat to another and in the dark at night, and still everything's where it's supposed to be. Here's the Gemini interior. It looked very nice, and they immediately, 2 of the boats were 149 passengers and 2 of them were 225, and they immediately sold out the 149s, and now they've been modified to 225. Okay, so should we stop for questions at this point? Because we're going to get into the... Yes. You're going to have to take the... Uh-oh. I tricked these guys.
Sure, let's just do the questions.
Okay, we'll do the questions at the end. So now we're going to talk about diesel emission reduction, and I'll go pretty fast through this. How are we doing with time? What time is it? Quarter. All right, we got to go fast. So diesel emission reduction. you probably, I don't know if anybody has noticed when you go down the freeway or you see a truck driving around now, you don't see a puff of black smoke anymore. And that's because of EPA, Clean Air Act, and they have catalytic converters, and they also inject a diesel DEF, it's called diesel engine fluid, which is urea, which is also used for fertilizer on farm and in your garden. But so that has come to the ferry boats. Again, if we go to the smoke, here's the chemistry of how that works. And basically, when diesel fuel is a hydrocarbon. When you mix it with oxygen, it gets hot and burns, and you make all this bad stuff. The only thing that's good in there is water. The rest of it's all bad for us. So how do we fix that? Well, I mentioned Tier 4 plus. So look at this. You see the black block that says Tier 1, 1996? Imagine that being a box of how much engine soot and carbon dioxide came out of that engine in a given period of time. Well, before Tier 1 was Tier 0, and it was as big as this entire screen and about 4 times deeper. That was Tier 1. 1996 went to Tier 1. Tier 2 is an eighth of that in 2004. Tier 3 was a little bit better, quite a little better. But look at Tier 4, that little blue tile on the bottom, and now the light blue tile is Tier 1 final, or Tier 4 final, and that's where we have to go today with all these ferry boats and workboats and tugboats in the marine business. And that's a big difference. And here's what it takes to get there. See this big blue engine and that silver box behind it? And then there's another part like the MTU blue and red that's even bigger than that. That's a diesel particulate filter. So in that's the catalytic converter, and they spray the urea in there, and it takes it back to that little tile, and it works. The chemistry and the technology have been around since 1954, but to put it in a boat is a real problem. Because where are you going to put that stuff? Yeah, well, that's what you have in all your ferries in the bay, except for the latest 3 have MAN engines. But all the rest of them, with one exception, there's one with Cummins, the Peralta, but all the rest are MTUs because they've been so reliable. This was that first boat with the black stack, the catamaran that I showed you. And look at the exhaust or lack of exhaust coming out of that stack. And that's when we went to Tier 3. So it's a big difference. This is one of the Gemini class boats, just so you could see what's in there. This is, to go fast, they have to be light. So they're aluminum, very carefully welded, designed first and then welded together, and light. They're about a quarter the weight of steel and just as strong. That's a pretty good looking boat. There's that pilot house again, different boat, but the same design. Look at that bow, how thin that thing is. It's like a razor blade, especially if you're standing over here instead of straight on. So that's part of the speed. With the low weight, the speed, you get the speed from the narrow hulls, 2 narrow hulls instead of one big fat one. And then this is an interceptor on the stern that does some things that knocks the wake down about 25-30%. Nichols Brothers, I mentioned this because 3/4 of the ferry boats on the bay are built by Nichols Brothers in Whidbey Island, Washington. Excellent builder. Super high efficient propellers. And then this is the wake. And do you see you see a few little ripples there, on the side of that, but it's mostly froth. And it's because of the hull shape and the weight and the angle of the tack. This is Mary Culnane, the chief engineer for WIDA. We just finished the first Tier 4, remember that little blue chip? So we beat that little chip. Double rainbow. This is the Hydrus class. There are 4 of these boats. They run from Oakland, Alameda to generally Oakland, Alameda, San Francisco, but sometimes they use them in Vallejo service. And let me back up. They're propeller boats, and they do 28 knots, which is 30 miles an hour. And they're very comfortable, quiet, very quiet. This is you can go on Oakland, Alameda ferry schedule and get the schedules online. They run quite often. This is again going back to Crowley Maritime, how Crowley started and what they did. Okay, this is Tom Escher's boat, one of your members, the Anhydra, and it's a tour boat that runs out of Pier 43.5, and it's electric and diesel. It's a hybrid. So it can go out and do a tour on batteries. Very clean. You can't get cleaner than that. So this is BAE hybrid drive. This is what drives that ferry. You got a diesel engine going through this. BAE is British Aerospace. At the time we did this boat and the one before it, there were 6,000 buses with this system in it. This is a new hydrogen fuel cell ferry that runs from the ferry building to Pier 41, Friday, Saturday, Sunday for free. And the exhaust from this thing, it burns hydrogen, pure hydrogen, and the exhaust is water, pure water and air. And they have a little drinking fountain device. You can go up and get a drink out of the exhaust, and I have done that. So this is an emerging technology. I've been working with these guys since, 8 years or something to get this done.
Is it free?
What's free? Oh, because they want to promote hydrogen. Right by Pier 39. So the piers, that's a good question, because the piers are from the ferry building, even numbers go south, odd numbers go north. And if you don't know that, it's pretty easy to get really lost. This is the hydrogen's latest zero-emission industries here in San Francisco, South San Francisco. This is their latest boat, first one in the world. It burns hydrogen, pure hydrogen, and does 50 miles an hour. They took a big block Chevy out of there and put the hydrogen in it. And like one of the guys said, if you'd have told us we could do this 5 years ago, everybody in the business would say you're crazy. Well, there it is. So I just went up to a conference in Seattle, and I put this slide in here because these big car ferries, and I'm not going to read all the numbers, but the state of Washington is putting $3 billion into their fleet in the next 10, 15 years to electrify everything because they have a big dam. Like Hetch Hetchy, we have theoretically totally clean power here. Well, they have big dams also. And so they're going to do all of these boats. I couldn't resist. You see those 55-gallon drums strapped to the bottom of the truck? Yeah, well, you have to give them credit. They went from Cuba to Florida with that thing. They took the driveline out and put a propeller on it, and they made it. And they're fuel cells, as far as I can see. This is Crowley, and if you have any interest in maritime stuff at all, go to crowley.com and see what they're doing. Up in the upper right, that's an electric tug, all electric in San Diego. Down here on the right, these are big ocean class tugs, and they're 10,000, 11,000 horsepower. The Crowley barge there, this goes back when I was there in 1980. We started that service from San Juan, Puerto Rico to Jacksonville, Florida. And it actually had some other places coming from Texas and Louisiana and Pennsylvania. But that barge is 720 feet long. Remember that ferry boat I said was 425 feet long? Well, the football field is 300 feet. That one's 720, carries 512 trailers. That's kind of a ferry. And the Golden Gate Bridge Towers, next time you look out there, is 720 feet. Imagine that thing sticking up. That's how big that barge is. And they've got 5 of them. They've got all kinds of stuff going on in all over the world. And why do we care? Our grandchildren. It isn't going to make much difference to us. Again, look at the smog haze and the waves coming off the boat. That's 1980, I don't know, 83, I guess. That's it. So here's where you can go to get some information. There's a bibliography, Hyde Street Pier, stuff. So that's it.
Questions further left, my left. He's got the mic.
Two things. First, I don't know what a mole is generally, but I do know that Oakland Mole was the name of the terminal where the transcontinental trains terminated after 16th Street. You transferred to the Southern Pacific ferries.
Okay.
And second, when I was growing up, I lived in Tiburon, and we occasionally took the Tiburon ferry. We always thought that the only reason they could stay in business was that Crowley was using for the morning and evening ferry service the boats that they used for their bay tour business. And they did put on a catamaran, which was twice as fast, because very controversial, because the old rummies only had time for one martini and couldn't finish a room with the fridge.
I used to ride that boat, and I represent that remark. Not the old rummy part.
On his note, I've ridden the Tiburon and Sausalito ferry for decades as I was a kid. I've noticed since COVID, they're taking Alcatraz on the lee. I wonder why.
I have no idea. Well, let me answer that a little farther. Sorry, Steve. Just like vessel traffic system service is the Coast Guard has vessel traffic service, and they have put in ferry lanes that they're supposed to stay in. So every time a ferry leaves a dock or a tugboat or a ship, they have to call vessel traffic and report who they are and where they're going. And it may be that the Coast Guard and the operators agreed that that's safer, I would guess. Steve.
Charlie, thank you so much for being here tonight and for helping us understand the history of the ferries. My question is, where are we going from here?
That's a good one. Well, for the next 8 to 10 years, we know we're going to be building, Golden Gate's building 8 of those boats that are Tier 4 plus DPF, which is that little light blue tile for emissions. And they'll burn diesel, and they are all now using renewable fuel. And I said diesel, that's a mistake. They're using renewable fuel, which is a big difference. Renewable fuel is made from plant stocks. And somebody says in French fry oil. But so they're not digging the stuff out of the ground, putting it in the air. They're taking it from where we live and putting it into fuel. So that's a big step to renewable fuel. And you guys with the Matthew Turner were the first to do that, among the first. So it's not diesel, it's renewable fuel. So then the next step would be methanol power using renewable methanol, and like ethanol is corn alcohol, and hydrogen. The hydrogen can be made with in fact, Hornblower started a project to build a fuel barge here in the city. And now two companies in Seattle are following up on that and doing it. They put a hydrogen generator. They use electricity, put 2 electrodes in the water, and one of them, the oxygen comes out of one, the hydrogen out of the other, using a hetchy, clean electricity. So that's down the road a ways, but that's why we wanted to get that, and Tom Escher was a big one, to get that hydrogen ferry working. It took us 5 years with the Coast Guard to get it approved. It was difficult, and that's fair enough. I mean, you want to be safe with the first one. Just think of the Hindenburg. Don't think of the Hindenburg.
Question in the back.
Hey. Yeah, question. What year was peak ferry ridership, and where are we at today? compared to that peak?
Yes. I'll just use Golden Gate ferries and Vallejo. Well, they're all they're all about the same. But Golden Gate ferries in 2018 carried 2.5 million passengers. They sold 2.5 million tickets. Right now they're selling 1.7 million. So and at one point they were selling 6,000 in 2019-20. One time I was down there and the guys are all happy. I said, "What's going on, you guys?" And they said, "We doubled our ridership." I said, "How many? What do you mean?" Because there's 3 cars in a parking lot, or 10. They said, "We went from 6 to 12. It was that bad, but they kept running, which environmentally, I'm not sure. Oh, yeah, definitely. Because you were taking 3,000 people on a boat, and you had 50 boats. So, yeah, it was much higher. But that's the bridges came, and then the cars, and then people didn't want to have to wait in line at the ferry dock and whatever. Human nature.
Okay, we have one question from our online audience. Do you know why the key system mole was not straight and has curves?
Didn't think she said it went straight.
There you go. We have an authority here.
Okay, well, I have another question. Why was it called the key system?
Yeah, boy.
Something about, God, I used to know that. But it was something about the way it went into the go with it out. And it's something.
Oh, like a key in a lock.
Something.
Well, maybe, yeah, the cars would go both ways.
Right, yeah.
I know that, because the ferry part, they'd go on and come off. They didn't have to turn around.
She talked about that. I don't know how many times she loved it so much, except the day she forgot to put her skirt on. Women in those days in the 40s, she'd get ready and she put her blouse on, and she likes skirt on, and got all the way down to Dairy Bus. Realized she was late that day.
But the ferry was on
But
time.
the ferry was on time.
Right.
You were talking about the ways to make the boats go in the different times. What about the sun? These things that we use
Oh, solars.
all over the schoolyard. Can you use it? So
Yeah, all the Weta boats have solar power. It's enough to power the radio. To put it in perspective, seriously, square meter, this is probably 6 square meters, would do about 2 hair dryers on a sunny day. So it's, for the amount of power that we use, it doesn't work. And batteries, another place where we're headed is electrification. They're going to build 2 electric ferries for Treasure Island with batteries. And that's tricky because the amount on the Matthew Turner, which Stephen knows, the sailing ship that has that same hybrid plant, the amount of energy in the batteries, and the batteries are in big boxes, and the amount of power that's in a Tesla, how much gasoline do you think it takes to equal the power in a Tesla battery? About 1.5 gallons. It's a huge penalty for weight. And in a boat or an airplane, that's a problem.
I have a question. Well, take leave.
Oh, Charlie, this is a great talk. I'm a member at the South End Rowing Club, and we really appreciate low wake on ferries, and also as a swimmer. But my question for you is, with the low wake, are there any conditions on the bay where, it's stability questions with too much? I mean, if you had really extreme turbulence on the water, would it be of any concern for those ferries because of the hull shapes?
No, as far as turbulence and stability of these boats, all of the new high-speed boats, well, all of the boats built here since, not counting the anhydra tour boat, all the ferry boats are catamaran hulls. So they're inherently very stable. And during the design process, you have to submit plans and drawings and calculations to the Coast Guard, and you get a stability book and approval back. And they can go out in the open ocean and be stable. They're not allowed to go out there because the structure isn't strong enough, but they're stable enough.
Fireboats use
For what?
to kind of
Oh, you got me there. I think that one's Cummins powered, but don't. It's
Okay,
a new boat, and it's
Lola has some online question.
One more question from an online viewer. What ferries ran during and after the 1906 earthquake and fire?
I think they all did. I mean, there were like 50 boats running, and the catch was they couldn't get to the terminal. The dock was in bad shape and the buildings, and so that's when Tom Crowley stepped in and started moving them on barges as fast as they could, nonstop.
I have a question, and that's one. The general public has an impression that our fees on the bridges are really financing a lot of the ferry boats. So could you straighten that out for me?
It's true. Well, the voters passed RM2, Regional Measure 2 and 3, which take bridge toll money and put it into ferry boats. And that's WIDA. Golden Gate has their own. They raise the bridge toll to fund. I don't know what their loss is, but they call it fare box recovery. And the best fare box recovery is Vallejo. And it's like, well, in 2018, it was probably 65%. AC Transit and the buses, that means that for every dollar that they spend on operating those boats, the passengers are paying 2/3 of it. Whereas AC Transit or the bus system, they're like in the 15s or 20s%. So that's how much the buses are subsidized. So the ferries are, even though they're being heavily subsidized, they're not, it's a better value for one thing.
Question back here.
I know they're building a terminal in Redwood City. And also they were supposed to build a terminal in Petaluma. You know what the status is of those two terminals?
Not exactly. I know Redwood City's the mayor's been at every monthly board meeting for 20 years. So they really want it. Petaluma, I don't know. I haven't heard. That would be a stretch. Because of the current, twice a day it'd be easy. But the boats can get into shallow, like Redwood City, South San Francisco, that's only a 5-foot draft. These boats are only 5 or 6 feet draft. So they can get into those shallow places.
We have a question up front.
Yeah, what is the cost to build one of those vessels? Is there any federal subsidizing, or is it all done locally?
Man, I paid that guy to ask that question. No, there's a federal subsidy, generally 80%. And the cost, the first part is, like the Dorado there, that's probably a $32 million boat. So the feds pay 80%, and it comes with some strings attached. You have to buy America, so it has to be American, has to be 51% American. There's a bunch of rules. And since we don't have American engines that'll stand up, you're allowed an exception for the engines. But yeah, it's 80%, and the new boats will probably be 40 million for Golden Gate each. They're expensive. They're fun, yeah. and
And you
they're
get a drink on a lot of them, I think.
That's right. Now that's expensive.
Question back. All right. Well, thank you very much. We're glad you came tonight, and thank you those online who are asking questions, and thank you, Charlie, because you're the expert. We hope to always have the experts to inform us on topics that, are historical, but many of us know nothing about.
Well, I knew very little when I started here, but
What?
of the first 100 years. No.
Well, you're a marine engineer, so,
You pick it up as we go.
you pick it up as you go.